Welcome back. This is the LSK debate, and in our transition to the question that has been in the minds of many Kenyans, and that is the war, or is it the exchange between the judiciary and the executive. Let me begin with you, Bernard, because we've seen a little bit of political heat in the political circles, attacks against the judiciary, criticism of decisions that have come from the different courts, but also a meeting between the leaders of the three arms of government. How do you understand with this what's going on, and what should be the way forward as LSK watching?
Thank you, Sam, and viewers. The utterance by the President of the Republic of Kenya, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, recently, that they would choose to ignore court orders was extremely unfortunate. I would have expected the President of the Republic of Kenya, having cooled down on his timbers, to issue a public apology and say that was a slip of the tongue, and this government, the executive, parliament, and all institutions would obey, would respect court orders. Having said that, there is no problem in the executive aid. There's no problem in the speakers of parliament and the Chief Justice meeting to deliberate on matters that govern organs of government. And these are leaders who are there on merit. The Chief Justice is there on merit. The speakers are there on merit. The President as well. But before they do the meeting, the Chief Justice should have demanded that the President of the Republic of Kenya should issue a public apology countermanding his earlier statement, which, as I have said, was not just reckless, but it had the potential of pushing this country to an abyss. It's very important, Sam, that the context from which the President addressed the Republic of Kenya was on matters of corruption. And I have said corruption in this country is not a preserve of the judiciary. There is endemic corruption in the executive, in parliament. There is a corruption in the judiciary. There is corruption in parastatals. There is even corruption in counties. And my proposal was that the President should have a meeting continuously with the heads of organs of government, organically, so that they discuss corruption and provide a Marshall Plan on how to address this corruption. So for me, what the President did was unfortunate. The Chief Justice at the same time also, unfortunately, missed a step by rushing to State House to have a meeting without demanding for an apology from the President. All is not lost.
But what would be the scope of those discussions between the heads of the three arms?
My view of the matter is that the discussions would be collegial discussions between heads of organs of government, because even though these organs of government are supposed to operate under the principle of separation of power, even though they are supposed to be distinct, truly speaking and practically, there is no complete separation of power, because the executive collects funds and manages the funds. Parliament makes legislation, and the judiciary is supposed to interpret this legislation and the law for purposes of ensuring that the other organs are able to function optimally. So, as far as I am concerned, on thematic areas, on principle of deepening good governance, they can meet so that they find ways of agreeing in principle on how each organ can be strengthened. For example, Sam, as we talk today, the judiciary receives less than 1% of funding, 23 billion against 3.7 trillion. The judiciary has 142 magistrate courts against 1,100 police posts. Against
and you think that's a discussion that the President should have with the Chief Justice?
Yes, those are the discussions that they can discuss on how the judiciary as an organ can be given capacity so that it can deal with issues that is given to it under Article 159 and 160 of the Constitution.
Oh, okay, Caroline, what do you think about that? Should we be seeing such kind of meetings at a time that Kenyans are pretty suspicious, and there's a reason why the three arms of government, as per the Constitution, are separate?
Thank you, Sam. The three arms of government are established by the Constitution. None of them is superior to the other. And the judiciary should not behave or be treated as the lower cadre of the three arms of government. There had been persistent attacks on the judiciary by the head of state. And that, to us as advocates and to any members of the society, felt that that would threaten the rule of law and administration of justice. Looking at the context of those persistent attacks all of them were on decisional matters handled by various judicial officers. None of them was on, let's say, administrative actions taken by the judiciary. So public perception is everything. Public expectation is everything. Mm-hmm. From where I stand, the timing of this meeting between the three heads of the three arms of government mm-hmm. was wrong, and especially that between the Honorable CJ and the head of state, given the prevailing circumstances then. Because we, as lawyers and many members of the public, activists, we're all over here in the streets saying that there is need to establish and protect the independence of the judiciary. Just before we put our placards down, we see that there's going to be a meeting. The following day, as advocates, we see that our work was being taken away by the Huduma centers, courts or establishments in the
service centers.
Mm-hmm. So for me, that gave the wrong impression to all of us and to the country at large.
Is there a place for conversations between the heads of the three arms of government? And what is that?
Yes, there is, and there's nothing wrong. We're not saying that there's anything wrong with the heads of the three arms of government meeting, deliberating on issues for efficient service delivery to our members, or to the members of the public. There's nothing wrong with that.
So how exactly does a meeting of the Chief Justice, the President, and the Speaker of the National Assembly and the Senate quicken service delivery or make it more efficient?
Let me answer it this way. Look at the circumstances under which this meeting was called and held. There were persistent attacks on the judiciary. Mm-hmm. Then suddenly there is an invitation for a meeting, and then that it...
I'm not interrupting. It is the CJ who called for a meeting. Thank you.
Yes, and if you look mm-hmm. at the Constitution, the drafters of the Constitution were very clear mm-hmm. on what institution ought to be independent. Yeah. Apart from the independent bodies, constitutional bodies, it's only the institution of the judiciary mm-hmm. where it is expressly mentioned in the Constitution as the institution to watch in terms of independence. There is nowhere in the Constitution...
So when that meeting happens, doesn't it interfere with that perception or even reality?
Precisely, that is my point, that this timing...
Okay.
And what the attacks or the attackations were about were on decisions made by judicial officers. It had nothing to do with... They could meet and talk about administrative issues like funding. Although, even on funding, if you look at the drafters of the Constitution, they were very keen on establishing a judicial fund. We do not see an executive fund being provided for in the Constitution. Therefore, the framers of the Constitution were clear that mm-hmm. this is the only institution that is the last line of resort. We all run to the judiciary. And that is why the two folds of the judicial independence, that is on the decisions and two on the funding, must be protected.
All right. Even though the executive is a consolidated fund, I don't know what that means in your answer. But Faith, talk to me about those attacks, especially from the political side against the judiciary, and your take on these conversations. Even if there are challenges in the judiciary or whichever arm of government, is it the place of the Chief Justice to go to State House or wherever the meeting will be held to have a conversation with the President?
I would start with when the conversation started, with the head of state making the utterance, and I would say roadside utterances at a construction site. At the high side that there was going to be a Court of Appeal hearing the next day, and the Law Societies was also represented in that matter on the housing levy, the Finance Act. And so you see the head of state making such utterances challenging that the judiciary is derailing his agenda. Mm-hmm. And the next day, they're in court, and thereafter he continues to make his scathing remarks, even irrespective of the Law Society making a statement to that effect. The challenge that we see with that is, and I would say the story thereafter is that the Chief Justice, as the head of Judicial Service Commission, comes together with her members and makes that statement. Now, when she goes to meet the president, what we see is that it's the Chief Justice, her Deputy Chief Justice, her Chief of Staff, and the acting CRJ taking her along. Where were the rest of the Judicial Service Commission members who made a strong statement saying that the judiciary is independent? If the president has evidence of corruption, let him come and bring that evidence. So the question is, first, why were they left out of that meeting? Were they in agreement or not? Secondly, there's no clear agenda what they're going to discuss. I don't know how you're going to discuss corruption. You're going to discuss your independence. Are you going to negotiate the independence of the judiciary? Are you going to negotiate that there are members of your judiciary that are corrupt, and so you're coming to sit together? So there's no problem with them meeting and talking, but at the hindsight of what has been building, and you come out even strongly against the same, then we see you rushing to go and sit with the head of state. It raises a lot of question marks. And secondly, even if you look at the statement that comes thereafter, its promises to the judiciary and general ascertainment that they will fight corruption, all three arms of government. Aren't there institutions to fight corruption? Don't we have the ESCC to do the same? Don't we have the Judicial Service Commission to deal with the issue of corruption with judges? So I don't really see what was coming out of that meeting, that they had to come and sit together. And so the challenge for the Chief Justice is that as the head of the judiciary, we're coming from a backdrop of the previous regime where certain judges could not be appointed merely because they were termed as corrupt without evidence. And some of these judges are our unsung heroes, Justice Odunga, Professor Ngugi, amongst others, who have continued defending the rule of law. And so when for us, we felt like it was more of a punishment for having stood strong against the executive. So when the Chief Justice rushes to meet the head of state at that backdrop, the question is she standing for the rest of the judiciary? She does not stand in that position just as the Chief Justice, but it's an office of the public. The public are looking up to her to stand for justice for all of the members of the public. The rest of the judiciary are also looking up to her that she will defend their independence. They'll be able to make decisions without fear or favor. And so when we see her going to negotiate on the same, we ask, the question is, on what basis?
And Peter, your response to this, but also what the Law Society of Kenya must do if it is to be seen to defend the independence of
thank you very much, Sam. Let me, I'll be more blunt. My colleagues have been pussyfooting around the issue. To Chief Justice Martha Koome, the message is clear. Dismiss those advisors of yours, because under no circumstance can you be advised to have a meeting with a sitting president, a meeting which is not structured, a meeting whose agenda is not predetermined, a meeting which is being done in a manner to portray that you are caving to the executive. Remember that we have a very, very powerful presidency in our constitutional order. The judiciary is supposed to exist as a counterpoint to that power. And therefore, the Constitution itself has issued a prohibition under the doctrine of separation of powers that does not require you as Chief Justice to interfere with functions of the executive, to be seen as if you are surrendering the judiciary to the executive. As Law Society of Kenya President, I will advise you to ask yourself one question. How many times have you seen Chief Justice Roberts at White House asking for favors or having tea with President Biden? The solution is that our constitutional framework has an elaborate mechanism for addressing issues between the executive, the judiciary, and the legislator. What my colleagues have not mentioned to you, Sam, is that we have an institution known as the National Council for the Administration of Justice, which the Law Society of Kenya President sits, members from the executive sit, members from Parliament sit, and it addresses these organic challenges which the Chief Justice purported to go to the State House to address. My view is that we have a Chief Justice who needs help. As Law Society of Kenya President, we will be able to advise the Chief Justice well. We will advise her to be more strategic and avoid meetings at State House by all means necessary. Because these meetings are not good for the development of the rule of law. They create a public perception. Remember, decision making, when the judiciary is making important decisions on the executive, and then you as Chief Justice, you just walk to State House, then a clip shows you seated on your own. There is no anyone else that you've come with. You are the president of the Judicial Service Commission, the chairperson of the Judicial Service Commission, and then you don't have anyone to back you up. So from a legal practitioner standpoint and from a public perception standpoint, that meeting was wrong.
Okay.
And it created the impression that now the judiciary has been surrendered to the executive. And you can see this perception sometimes being fortified. When immediately after the Chief Justice goes to State House, then you have Huduma centers which have been established. And as lawyers, we're asking ourselves, was that a deal that you cut at State House? What are you talking about? You're establishing Huduma centers. Where is the concept note for these Huduma centers? Why are you establishing these Huduma centers in government buildings? Why not in the law courts? So you can see that the concerns for us who are at Better Kenya, we have legitimate concerns which really the Chief Justice must look at. So going forward, myself, if elected LSK President, when seated with the Chief Justice at the National Council for Administration of Justice, I will tell the Chief Justice, will advise her properly. Maybe she doesn't have good advisors, but she needs to know that the executive operates like a hydra. It's a we call it a Frankenstein monster, which you cannot touch unless you do so in a structured manner. If it is a question of money, ask your accounting officer to go to Parliament and lobby for money. Don't go yourself as Chief Justice to State House. Because one is that despite these manifestations about presidential power, we have a very, very powerful presidency. Do you know it is President Ruto who determines, as Commander-in-Chief, the bodyguard of the Chief Justice? So how can you go there without a structured mechanism?
How so? How do you prove that? That he's the one who
The president is the commander-in-chief. The president directs all security services in Kenya. So the president can, in a subtle manner, and this is how you can control a Chief Justice.
Just hold on, Peter.
Let me explain this. If you are a president,
just listen to the question.
If you are a president,
give me an answer. I'm asking you this question.
Yes.
So the bodyguard of the Chief Justice, what sector
is a security officer.
From what?
The issue is, and we have seen this,
and
this is now where
the police or the military?
They come from the police. And the president...
And the president commands the police?
The president is the commander-in-chief
of
the armed forces.
Sorry,
the president directs security services in Kenya.
Peter.
Every day at State House.
Peter,
Let me give you the reality, Sam.
He's the commander-in-chief of defense forces.
Yes.
Is the police part of the defense forces?
Of course not. But every day, the National Security Council reports to the president. The National Security Council, the Inspector General, who under the Constitution, reports directly to the president. In practice, every day when the president is getting security briefings, and that's what we know from our experience.
Does Peter sit in the National Security Council? How would he know?
Peter, so the Police Inspector General sitting in the National Police Service, is he also briefing the president about the bodyguard of the Chief Justice?
So let me explain you the reality. And this is what happens to the Moi order. When a president wanted to control a judge, what they will do is that some judges who issue problematic decisions, you just get the Inspector General of Police, by then the Commissioner of Police, to second a sickly, weekly policeman to guard that judge. So and it sends a message.
Sorry, Peter, we're under the Constitution of Kenya 2010.
Yes.
That is still happening.
No, what I'm telling you, the reality. And you remember what Chief Justice Maraga said?
Beguiling the members of the public with conjecture.
We are explaining real issues. The Chief Justice Maraga raised this.
Let's stop focusing on conjecture.
The Chief Justice Maraga raised the issue of being denial access to the VIP lounge in a public conference.
Sorry, my question was very specific.
Yes.
And you have exhausted your answer. So, Harriet, talk to me about what you think should happen because of those meetings, the attacks from the judiciary, and what role the Law Society of Kenya should play.
I'll start, Sam, by saying that it is extremely important for the president to keep his hands off the independence of institutions. He needs to also keep his hands off the desire to mutilate the Constitution. You know, whereas you're looking at what happened as only the question of independence of the judiciary, remember, as has been mentioned, the declarations were side declarations. Article 35 of the 135 of the Constitution tells us that where the president wants to issue a decree or an order on something, there's a form. And it is not those roadside declarations. You know, the moment the president starts making those ones, then we are going back to a situation of anarchy. We are going back to a situation of dictatorship. So that was the first mistake. Those roadside declarations and the intention that they should be obeyed as if they were formal instructions of the president. So he needs to follow the law, and he needs to be well advised on that. The other issue there is Article 159 and Article 160. We are advocates. I am running to be the president of the Law Society of Kenya. I litigate. I go to court. I have clients. And what the independence of the judiciary is supposed to do is to guarantee equality for everybody, whoever you are. And that's what Article 159 and Article 160 tell us. Whether you are Wanjiko from Murang'a, or Aisha from Mombasa, or Harriet from Nairobi, you must be able to access justice fairly. So when the president is dissatisfied with decisions of the court, we have an appellate system. He should exhaust that. Where, as in this case, he alleges that there is a problem of corruption, he needs to know that we have Article 168 that talks about the process for removal of a judge on the basis of corruption. And you know what? The president has a role towards the very end of that process. So what he did actually was extremely counterproductive, because then it also short-circuited a process that would otherwise be able to be undertaken objectively. He is not Wanjiko. The BBI case told us that the president cannot institute some of these things. Either the JSC can, of its own motion, do it, or a Kenyan citizen can also file a petition. And where the JSC is satisfied that the person has a case to answer, then a tribunal is set up to look into those particular allegations, but only after that thing has been confirmed.
Do I hear you saying that the president cannot petition the JSC to remove a judge if dissatisfied with something?
When you look at the strict wording of Article 168, the petition can only be moved by an individual or the JSC. In the BBI case, the Supreme Court, the highest court of the land, actually held that the president does not fall within that category of anybody in this country. And so he cannot do that. Let other people be able to file that. The other thing, Sam, I'd like to say is that going forward, if we are indeed to make sure that the independence of the judiciary is safeguarded, we must think about the funding of the judiciary, so that we don't have situations whereby we are told by the Chief Justice that I'm going to have conversations. In the first place, her timing was wrong. This was not the time for her to go and call for a meeting with the president. In fact, by doing that, it is extremely unfortunate, because she actually reduced the power of the independence of the judiciary. That was a compromise that was extremely unnecessary. And as the Law Society, we had actually stood up with the judiciary. So there she also, she also sold us off in terms of, as a country, in terms of our ability to rely on the judiciary and its independence. So during my term as a president, I will actually look into that question, and if we need, we have many lawyers. If we suggest to them that let's look for legal interventions or legislative interventions as to how then we can ensure and ring-fence independence of the judiciary through financing, our advocates are able to do that. That's an opportunity for them.
All right.
The other thing,
I have to cut you short because we need to take a short
and I will allow you to do that, Sam.
And you're getting to the tail end of the discussion. So let's take the break. We'll be back shortly.